EverGreene Architectural Arts, sorry, they are project contractors. And who better to share the specific details about the world of conservation and historic preservation than EverGreene, and specifically Kelly Caldwell. So Kelly is the director of conservation and the senior conservator based out of their Brooklyn office. And she's certified as an AIC professional associate and brings over 15 years of experience in the fields of archaeology and conservation. Kelly oversees the operations of all the projects from a management and conservation perspective, and she's directly involved with numerous projects within the conservation division involving architectural elements, masonry, public art, monuments, and artifacts. So perfectly aligned for this kind of project here. And I really could go on. I mean, Kelly and everyone from EverGreene have been just absolutely amazing, and we enjoy having them in our building. But before I turn it over to her, I'm just going to do a little bit of housekeeping. So if you have questions, put them in the chat room. Angelica, who's the assistant director at the museum, is managing the chat room. And if you have questions, they'll appear there, and we'll try to answer all of your questions after the program is over. And also, if you enjoy this program and if you enjoy this evening and would like to see more of this type of programming, please consider making a tax-deductible donation to the museum. We'll put a link in the chat box for you to do that. And you can always go on our website, but we really appreciate the support and would love to be able to continue to offer free programs like this. So we hope that you can support the museum. So now it's my pleasure to turn this over to the expert, Kelly Caldwell.
Hi, everybody. Thank you very much, Deb and Angelica, for including us not only in this presentation, but as part of the team for the preservation of the Museum of Early Trades and Crafts. We joined the team in November of last year, and then started on site at the project in December of 2020. So with the presentation today, I'm going to talk a little bit about the behind the scenes of the work that we're doing, but also give a little bit of a background of exactly what is preservation, what is conservation, what is restoration, and all these sort of different terms that come together to help preserve historic structures, spaces, and objects. So as Deb noted, I'm the Director of Conservation for EverGreene Architectural Arts. I've been part of this team for just over 2 years, and previously working for a sister company, Conservation Solutions, which is now part of EverGreene Architectural Arts for an additional 7 years prior to that. Some of the major projects that I've been involved in is obviously the Museum of Early Trades and Crafts, Del Martin School, which is just down the road in Morristown, New Jersey, as well as projects here in New York, such as Trinity Church and Penn Station. EverGreene Architectural Arts is a large-scale preservation nationwide company that has focuses in many different branches of preservation, including restoration, conservation, as well as pre-construction planning and design. Within that department, they also work with numerous types of secular and non-secular organizations to create new artworks, such as murals and mosaics, all of which are managed through our headquarters here in New York City, as well as remote offices throughout the country in Washington, D.C., Chicago, and Los Angeles. The focus of what I'm going to talk about is a little bit more on the conservation side, since that's the department I work in and manage. But to bring it back, wanted to look at what exactly is preservation. Notably in the United States, historic preservation was created during the 1960s with the creation of the Historic Preservation Act in 1966. As many of you probably know, the demolition of the Penn Station train station received a large public outcry, but unfortunately, there was no legal or federal standing to salvage or save the building. With that, as well as through other federal organizations such as the Historic American Building Survey, or notably HABS, who had been documenting numerous historic structures throughout the country, had realized by 1965 of the 12,000 places that had been documented, at least half had been destroyed or damaged beyond repair. Because of things like that and the uproar that happened with the Penn Station, the Historic Preservation Act was created. The Act provides federal support and oversight through advisory boards and committees, as well as the National Register of Historic Places. It does not necessarily support legal action, but provides advocacy and a lot of funding through grants and nonprofit secondary organizations. As Deb noted, the museum received its state registration in 1972, as well as a national listing in 1980. On top of that, the city of Madison received commercial district, which the museum is part of, and that was registered by the state and national districts as well. So as I noted, preservation is sort of an umbrella of a lot of different facets that we all work in, both within our company and in the greater field. There are different sectors and how we approach things in terms of the methodologies, the theories that we use, as well as the practical interventions that we engage on structures and objects and spaces. So it ranges from everything from conservation, where we're looking to slow time down, preserve as much historical elements and historical ephemeral knowledge as possible through minimal intervention. Then there's restoration, where a little bit more interventive actions are taken, such as restoring a paint scheme rather than just doing touch-ups. Then you have certain features such as rehabilitation and reconstruction, which involve a lot of the terms you've probably heard of, such as adaptive reuse, where buildings no longer function or have the same original idea or purpose as they did, but maybe they get turned into a coffee shop or a educational center. The idea that the library itself, the James Library, was rehabilitated into the museum is a way that, and when this happened in this earlier on, was a form of early rehabilitation of the building, is that adaptive reuse, so the building can still be preserved, but then have a new function while retaining the historic elements. And also, this is a perfect time that we are having this talk, because May is actually Historic Preservation Month, as identified by the National Trust and their slogan, "This Place Matters." So who works in preservation? Because there's a lot of different facets to it, both of the practical and theoretical side, there's a lot of different trades and professions that work within this field. Myself as a conservator, as well as architects, engineers, cultural historians, museum professionals, scientists and researchers, project managers, as well as people that come from more of the traditional trades and crafts, such as a lot of artists, masons, blacksmiths. Conservation itself came out of that field of both trades and arts, and where people that just knew how to repair things, they knew how to fix an old window, they knew how to put a finger back on a sculpture, and that eventually evolved through more formal programs that started in around the 1970s, combining it with science to look at more materials and understanding the materials, not just the physical fixing of things. So most notably here, a great photo that was identified to me of, this is some of the original crews who built the library back in 1899. Luckily, we are a much more diverse organization and diverse field, which we continue with, training programs, both in the trades as well as in academia. So what is the actual process of conservation? There's the physical side of what we do, but there's a lot other things that we look at. So one of the biggest things is looking at the background and the who and the why of we do things. Why should things be preserved, and who has a say in the preservation? In the case of the museum, who are the stakeholders? It's the employees, it's state and local and city organizations, it's federal organizations. There are a lot of different people who have a say and have a voice into what should happen to a local community building. The other aspect that we also look into is a little bit more of the technical side of, what approaches were used to traditionally make this building, and are those just as important as the materials that were used? And a lot of times with masonry, for example, you would see tooling marks that show the physical hand of the mason, but to another person, the type of stone that they used could be equally as important. So always evaluating every single aspect of a building's construction and history. And a lot of that is material knowledge and material resources that a conservator has to be knowledgeable about. One of the other main things is, how is the building going to be reused? As I noted, adaptive reuse is a commonplace because not everywhere can just be a historic house museum. A lot of historic buildings, they need to be rehabilitated in order to function and to increase revenue and to continue using the space so the history of that location is not forgotten. So for example, the photos that I'm showing is of the Minokan building, which we worked on some of the earlier iterations in the previous photo, which was a plantation house in Richmond, Virginia. And here is an example of some proposed restoration approaches for preserving some of the historic elements as found, as well as a full-scale restoration with newer elements. As you can see, it's referred to as the glass box. There are a lot of stakeholders involved in these types of projects in both federal, state, and local, but also there's a lot of different ideas and approaches that this could be taken in terms of how much do you preserve, which elements do you keep, what's most important, and how do you still use the building in terms of access and visitor experience. So within conservation itself, there's a little bit of a delineation between conservation and restoration. And this image of a bicycle kind of gives you, in my opinion, a little like a very good example of how that works. So within conservation, we have guiding principles, and it mainly revolves around the documentation of what is there, as well as the documentation of what we are doing. That stands as part of the historic record. Also, are we using the appropriate types of materials and the idea of reversibility? Well, in certain cases, things that we do are not reversible. If you clean dirt off of something, replacing it or reversing that is not possible. But using materials that are completely incompatible with the historic is what we try and want to avoid. We don't want to cause more damage, and it's the idea of minimal intervention with any of the work that we do. So using the example of the traditional bicycle from a restoration approach is, you may take parts from maybe a newer bicycle to make it restored, make it look like it did originally in the 1800s or the early 1900s, versus conservation is looking more to stabilize some of the deterioration and get it into a stable state that it could be viewed, versus restoration where somebody might actually want to ride that bicycle. So what are the type of skills are required of a conservator? Seeing that there are many different specialties within conservation itself. As Deb noted, I have a background in both archaeology and architecture. So my focus is more in a lot of masonry, historic structures, as well as sculptural objects. There are other conservators that specialize in textiles or books, manuscripts, as well as in our company, we have people who specialize in murals, paintings, as well as paint studies and other architectural elements. One other factor that we also work on a lot is outdoor sculpture, and that can be both historic as well as modern. Here are some of examples of some of the projects that we work on, from outdoor bronze work, doing paint analysis, and doing repairs to some delaminating woodwork. And here's sort of, this is my typical kit of everything that I would normally take to sites with myself, that we would use for documentation. We do a lot of survey work where we will go and assess the conditions of the building before we proceed with any treatments. And then also we do a lot of testing and analysis, as well as historical research, because all of these little elements add up to how we develop treatment plans and how we help clients develop the work programs that need to be carried out. And part of that is prioritizing things based on what may be a life safety risk that needs to be preserved now, as well as, well, this could wait a couple of years until you have funding. So it's having that broader knowledge, but also looking at all of the sort of minute details of the conditions. One of the other big factors within skills of conservation is understanding safety protocols. In historic buildings and objects, we are often working on scaffolding. As you'll see some pictures of the scaffolding that we have at the museum, we're also working with hazardous materials such as lead paint or asbestos. And then, of course, as we all know, having to work with regulations for COVID-19. And we do that through in-house training as well as formalized trainings for programs such as OSHA, which some of you may have heard of. That is sort of the construction industry standards, as well as trainings for lifts and scaffolding for most of our staff. So as I noted, conservation is a multifaceted field, both within restoration, but we work with a lot of different teams and to produce a lot of different types of outlets. So we work closely with our project management team who deal with a lot of the larger restoration programs. We also do teaching and outreach, such as these types of presentations. We work in conjunction with other consultants, architects, as well as researchers and other organizations, whether it be federal or municipal. So we wear a lot of different hats, whether it's within a treatment capacity or we're consulting on a historic element ourselves. So to bring it back to the museum, the roles, there's actually two teams of conservators and in conjunction with the architects at the museum. And the initial team is the Historic Building Architects, which is HBA. They have a longstanding relationship with the museum and have been working on the long-term preservation goals for the museum. And as part of this current project, they have carried out a lot of original surveys, planning. They did a lot of testing and documentation, including paint analysis, to understand the current conditions of the building. And then we, as EverGreene, have been implementing the work plan by doing secondary documentation, project managing the work, carrying out mock-ups of all of the treatments that we are doing, as well as then completing the treatments themselves. So with that, the HBA team worked at the beginning of the project to really define the areas of deterioration and working with the museum of what was the priority areas. And through that, doing testing and research to understand what should be done where, what should we use, how should we use it to meet the client's needs, as well as the preservation of the building. And then in turn, we've taken all of that information and confirming that all of those applications are feasible and looking at them on a larger scale, and can all of these methodologies be replicated to produce what the client is expecting in terms of the repair work. And a lot of that has been focused on cleaning and stabilizing the historic elements, as well as the removal of some non-historic interventions that have occurred over the years, as well as where there are a few items that are missing is to replicate certain historic elements, such as some of the paint schemes. So what actually needed to be fixed in the museum? Lovely illustration by a local artist in the Madison area that I found. As Deb noted, the museum has undergone several programs to stabilize it and preserve it into the museum and for its current uses. And some of that work has included roof repairs, windows, and a lot of masonry repairs to actually get the building watertight. And then part of the work that we're currently carrying out is all focused on the interior, looking at cleaning, also masonry repairs, stabilization, and then repainting certain areas. So a little bit about some of the work that initially the HBA team have been doing to get to allow EverGreene to do what we're doing is part of their process was to review all of the previous assessments and reports that have been carried out. And this is sort of standard practice for a conservator or a historic architect. You want to understand what has been done to this building, because that may affect how it is currently deteriorating or doing really well, to figure out what did they do in 1960 that's caused this to go green, or what did they do in 1990 that was so great because we're not seeing any issues whatsoever. So over the past several decades, a fair amount of work has happened to the space, most notably things starting in 1984 with an assessment which identified the problems that were seen with water infiltration issues. And then a number of repairs were carried out based on that assessment. And then a follow-up assessment was carried out by an architect firm, noting the presence of failing paint and efflorescence on a lot of the painted glazed brick. And efflorescence is the presence of salt blooms on the surface. this started to become more and more of a prevalent issue. So it was noted that there was water filtration issues, and that resulted in a lot of the exterior masonry work they created a preservation plan. And a lot of historic structures or places will have that type of overarching preservation plan that will document current conditions as well as provide a game plan, whether a 5, a 10-year, a 20-year look ahead, to help owners develop strategies as well as protocols for maintaining and managing their projects. And then of the most recent reiteration, HBA went in 2009 and did a secondary survey and testing program to confirm the current conditions to develop the current work program. So this current treatment plan, here is an older building prior to some of the reiterations that Deb and her team have taken on of updating a lot of the displays, as well as information about the museum itself. But with the current treatment plan, the focuses are listed here. We are working predominantly in the north and south galleries for those that have been there. It's as well as the east gallery where the entrance and the shop is, a few isolated locations. So most of this work involves the removal of non-historic paint. During the 1990s, inappropriate or non-compatible paint materials were used. And as a result of that, combined with the walls drying out, the paint has failed. We also are looking in the South Gallery, similar where water infiltration had ingressed through the building. And as it dries out, the water, seeing that the exterior of the building was made watertight, the moisture only has one way to go, and that is evaporating into the building. So it is resulting in some additional failing paint, as well as the presence of salts. So here's an example in the South Gallery, the top of the chimney. What we're meaning by efflorescence. So there, from the water infiltration, you can see there's sort of the drips that have stained the water that has stained the front of the chimney, the ashlar blocks, as well as sort of these larger brown stains. This is the result of this type of stone has mineral deposits in it that have been drawn to the surface as a result of the stone being wet and then drying out and then getting wet and then drying out in a cycle frequently. And with those minerals such as iron deposits or manganese stains, you're also getting salts, which are precipitating on the surface. So here you can see there's sort of this white spot that this photo is taken from the ground. At close up, you can see that this whole section is actually spalling off, and that's because there are salts that are actually growing in behind the front surface of the stone. So one of the treatments that we're carrying out is addressing these salt issues as well as treating these spalled areas. As I noted, one of the other areas that we are looking at is the South Gallery, where moisture was getting trapped in behind the multiple layers of paint, as well as some of these later paint reiterations. And as a result, as the wall dries out, the paint peels with it. So we have come in and done a lot of work to stabilize the paint layers as well as remove failed paint. So how are we doing all of this? Because one of the key elements, even though through COVID, was to keep the museum open, both to the public as well as to the staff. That was a key element of the work that we had a lot of communication and engagement with Deb and the team to make sure that everything was accessible for ourselves to complete the work, but also to provide a functioning space for her team and the public to not affect the visitor experience. So we had customized scaffolding, which is, if you've been into the space since it's been installed, it's as contained as we can be, but still be able to fit our teams working on the scaffolding. Also extensive site protection. Some of the materials that we're working with, as noted, there are traces of lead paint in locations, but also some of the cleaning materials that we are using can be a little smelly. So we want to make sure that we're protecting ourselves from a safety perspective, as well as the visitor and employees. Also with this is, training of our staff in the different procedures that we are carrying out, both cleaning and stabilization, as well as repainting. And then, as I noted, a strong communication with the client and the public to make sure that everybody is being safe, but also understanding what is happening at the museum at this time. So to go in a little bit more detail of some of the treatments that we're carrying out, here is our team members. It's a couple of videos I'm going to show. This is the latex cleaning product. The brush under the surface that absorbs the leather that is on the surface. And then that totally dry. I'll kind of show you. It gets applied over all of this foam surfaces. And then you let it dry overnight and it poultices out the soiling that is sitting on the surface. So here this was a smaller mock-up section that we carried out. A very lovely noise and gratifying feel of painting. So you can see on the left-hand side, that's the before with the heavier, darker soiling in this area compared to the clean surface. And what we're removing here is just general dirt and debris that is collected on the surface of this chimney over the past 100 years. 100 plus. One of the other big aspects of our work is the paint removal. As I noted, there were several areas as the wall dried out, the paint was failing. So we tested a lot of different areas to confirm the best methodologies, as well as dwell times. While we may have all agreed on one material and working with the team from HBA, there were different ways that you could apply it, thicknesses, how long do you leave it on? So that was all part of that initial mock-up period and communication with the architects and their teams to find the best methodologies for removing the failed paint from the surfaces. The other big portion of our work is the removal of the salts. The salts, while they are sort of sitting on the surface, they also live within the stones and the mortar and the brickwork as well. So in order to get that out, we have to poultice it. So some of the technology that we're using is very simple. This is an example of some of the paper poultices that we used. Some of the other products that we used are a little bit more high tech, a little bit more modern, and that's the whole, with the advancement of conservation, there are some traditional trades and crafts and approaches that we use, but then sometimes we combine it with science and try and find new methodologies that will be better for the building as well as environmentally. Here's another video for, as I noted, the chimney had a lot of spalls and areas of deterioration. And this is just an example of how we are treating those. This is myself. We had to sort of retool the surface, is what it's referred to, because when the spalls occur, it's kind of leaves a very rough surface, and to sort of smooth it over so the chimney would look more visually like it did originally, it was the process of retooling. Lastly, one of the other repair programs that we are doing, because of the amount of salts and to allow the building to finally dry out as much as possible, we removed a lot of the joints in the north and south galleries, mechanically removing the mortar joints between the brickwork. And also we will be then repointing those based on the analysis that HBA's team did to match a historically accurate as well as color matched mortar to replicate the original. And then the last step of our process, which is kind of where we're moving into right now. All of this work has started in between December and January of this year. So sort of a phased approach. And we are currently moving into the next phase, which is the mock-ups and the implementation of the paint and stenciling process. One of the great features of this building is the interior color scheme, which is a combination of paint and glazes and stencils and a sort of very warm hues and colors, very typical of the Richardson Romanesque style that the building was created. So here's an example of the presenting surface with the sort of mustard background color and the sort of more foresty green. The stencil at the top, this floret imagery, that's some of the original. And then you can see just a little bit of the differences with the sort of hazy outline. And these are some of the later alterations. So where we have areas of failing paint, these have all been cleaned, and then we will replicate the paint structure in those locations. In order to do that, our team creates stencils, which is how this work would have been done traditionally, which allow us to keep the sort of crisp lines and consistency with the imagery that's seen on the walls. And with this, all of the work is done through a process called paint sampling and microscopy that was carried out by HBA to identify the cross section of the different layers of paint, because in order to get these sort of tones, there are multiple layers of paint. It's not just we paint one color and then the stencil over the top of it, all of which we have to replicate. So here is an example, not from the museum, but something from our studios of sort of the different, what I mean by glazes on a plaster work that you can get with just slightly different tones and different appearances just by using different glazes. So just quickly, some other work, just a comparable example. We also last year were working with the team at West Point at the Grants Barracks, which was a similarly highly decorative interior structure that was on poured cement rather than brick masonry. And this included heavy glazes and stenciling of decorative features, as well as a lot of emblems, one for each state. So there were New Jersey represented there as well. As you can see, there were a lot of cement damage and leaks from just deterioration of the building. So it was similar that, you know, the building was made watertight, pipes were fixed, and then we would go in and we repaired all of these sort of damaged areas of concrete, and then would clean, stabilize the adjacent paint, and then we would repaint the areas of walls. So based on that, any questions?
Kelly, I'm just going to give it one moment, but if anyone does have a question, you can go ahead and type that in the chat box now. Anything that Kelly presented for us tonight. So let's give it one moment.
Great. So just thank you so much, Kelly. This is just fascinating. And, you know, even someone who lives with this every single day and is in that building, just, you know, looking at it up close, the way your photographs showed some of those images, and just really talking about the process. You know, we just really are so appreciative of working with your team. It's just such a fascinating building and such a fascinating process to, you know, continue that work. So we're really excited to see, you know, what's going to happen, like once the scaffolding comes down and once the paint is on there. So
yes,
that's going to be the big reveal.
Exactly. With these types of projects where everything is sort of shielded, it will have very much that big reveal of that aha moment of, oh, we kind of forgot what that looked like 9 months ago. But I mean, it's been a very rewarding and interesting project for us because there have been so many different facets to it of both masonry and historic paint and glaze finishes. That, you know, as noted, we're really starting to dig into right now in terms of replicating the finishes for the walls, that both with our design team, our studio artists, as well as our conservation team, all working together to reproduce those finishes.
We do have a question. This one is, have you done any landscape historical preservation?
Not within the company, no. We don't focus on landscapes or any kind of ephemeral heritage connections. My background is archaeology, so I have a little bit from previous work experiences in the context of archaeological sites within a landscape, but not within the context of EverGreene. Our focus is historic architectural interiors and outdoor sculptures.
That's all the questions that came in tonight. If anyone has anything else, they can post it here, but otherwise, thank you, Kelly.
Thank you all very much. I appreciate it.
Yeah. And if anybody has any questions for us, I mean, we're happy to, talk about the process, or, this is the last, hopefully the last phase of the restoration for a while. We did all the outside, so now we're in moving into the interior. But it's been a wonderful process, and we've had great partners who have helped fund this, and great partners who have helped actually do the work on all of this. So we are really just very appreciative, and it's really an exciting project. So no questions, okay. Well, thank you all for joining us, and please, check out our website. We have lots of things going on. We have more programs like this. We have a lot of other exciting programs at the museum, and we are open, and we look forward to seeing you very soon. So thank you so much, and thank you, Kelly.
Thank you very much.